I am all aboard the Angel Studios train, man. Actually, I'm all aboard the indie movie train in general. I think many of us are feeling essentially the same way. We're sick of being spoon fed the same sludge from major production companies. It seems 80% of the movies coming out today have zero originality. They're not doing anything new, they're just stale, passionless stories with bloated budgets that make you scratch your head and wonder, where did all that money go? So, movies made by smaller studios like Sound of Freedom and American Fiction are a true breath of fresh air. And even the ones that don't blow my mind as a massive success are enjoyable experiences, like The Shift, because I know it was done on a relatively tiny budget. Well, 1 year after Angel Studios caught lightning in a bottle with Sound of Freedom, they're trying to see if lightning will strike twice if they give their next project a similar name. Will it? No. Sound of Hope seems poised to make another profit and continue to grow Angel Studios' war chest and therefore, hopefully, their ability to make bigger and better movies. But lightning like Sound of Freedom only strikes once. Plus, it didn't hurt that movie that vast swaths of the media came out and caused a stir about it, for some reason taking objection to a movie that exposed the still prevalent sex trafficking industry and centered on one man's righteous fight against it. Well, the critics aren't that dumb this time, and they gave Sound of Hope pretty much the score it deserves. But enough preamble, let's get into Sound of Hope. Don't worry, no big spoilers. The movie begins with Donna Martin dealing with the loss of her mother and begging God to take her from the pain she feels. When she sees a few kids laughing and playing and has what to any rational person in difficult financial circumstances is a terrible idea. Why doesn't she adopt some kids? Her husband, the pastor of the town's local church, understandably recoils at this idea. But Donna, convicted by the Lord, decides to circumvent her husband's protests and starts the process of fostering two kids behind his back, which, don't try that at home. I'm not even married, and I know that is almost always a recipe for disaster, especially when you already have two kids, one of whom has mental challenges. But for them it works out, and not only that, Donna and her husband WC, awesome name, convince their church to also take in foster children. Soon the whole town is fostering kids, but Donna and WC decide to bring in one more child. And that's where we meet Terry, a girl with serious mental issues and more baggage than any teenage girl deserves to carry who has been shopped around to different foster homes. Will the loving community of a small local church break through to this troubled child, or will it be another failed go-around for Terry? I mean, they made a movie about it. I feel like you can suss out the answer to that for yourself, but go see the movie. Sound of Hope, the story of Possum Trot, is a fairly simple story to tell. I mean, it's a true story, so it's pretty easy to avoid writing something that makes no sense. But that means it's all in the execution. So let's start with the bad, because that'll be a short section. They say it takes a village to raise a child. Well, in the case of Possum Trot, it takes a village to place every single child in the East Texas foster care system. The residents of Possum Trot took in a combined 77 kids from the foster care system among 22 families. That is incredible. But this movie takes a very narrow scope. It only really focuses on the Martin family. We hardly see any of the other families or children in the town. I understand that the Martins were the leaders whom everyone was looking towards to succeed, but the movie would have done well to widen its scope and examine the whole town. It really zeroes in on Terry. Again, not for no reason, but the equally, dare I say, more inspiring story is these families living off of the 2024 equivalent of $20,000 a year volunteering to take in kids. How did they get by? How did they provide for each other? We don't get to see that. I just reviewed Horizon, an American Saga, Chapter 1, and my big problem with that movie was that it had too wide a scope. Well, here the problem is the exact opposite. There was a bigger story to tell if they had just zoomed out a bit. But now for the good. The performances are solid. I mean, it's hilarious that the acting in this movie is better than in Madam Web, off of a tenth of the budget. Most of the good, though, is in the themes of this movie. Now, normally, I don't put a whole lot of stock into films' themes. Really, ever since the Defenders of the Last Jedi set up their tent on the hill of, but the themes were good. But films like Sound of Hope remind me that theme is an important part of storytelling if you make it one. Sound of Hope will convict you to do something. It exposes real problems in the foster care system today that we'll discuss in a minute. It shows what a community of Christians should actually be doing. Maybe the most powerful scene in the film for me as a churchgoer is when WC goes to a large, well-off church to ask for financial help from the head pastor, who says there's no room in the church's budget to help out a town that has taken in 77 of the foster system's hardest to place kids, despite an announcement playing over the speakers about the church's upcoming marriage retreat to the Caribbean. It's a reminder to Christians that the money we have is a resource provided by God that must be stewarded well, and to be careful to ensure the churches we give it to are using it to equip others for good works. Sound of Hope obviously gets its name from Sound of Freedom. I think it's easy to dismiss the name as a cheap ploy trying to cash in on the massive success of Sound of Freedom, but the two are inextricably linked. They both center on children and expose American society for neglecting its children, with most of us turning a blind eye to the suffering of the most vulnerable and innocent among us that hold our future in their hands, and whom many of the most narcissistic exploit as accessories to get clicks for themselves and signal their own virtue. But that's a whole other conversation. These movies tell the truth that, unfortunately, the most good is almost always not done by those with the most resources at their disposal. And it's definitely not done by those holding the biggest signs at the loudest protests or with the most slogans in their ex-bios. The ones among us who are making a difference are doing so at great personal risk to themselves, their families, and their financial stability. They're doing so because they're living for a cause bigger than themselves. And in exploring that, these films merit having the same name basis. The last thing this movie has to say is about the foster care system. According to this film, 30% of the almost 400,000 kids in foster care are there because they have dangerous home lives. Their parents are abusive, most likely, which is really sad. I don't know if that's the correct stat, but I have no reason to believe it's not, so I'll go with it. One of the kids fostered by the Martins is petrified as soon as the bath is turned on. The fact that a child would come from a home where the bath was made a traumatic thing should be enough to fill any decent person with some righteous anger and compel them to want to do something. And some of the people taking in foster kids are also evil, just doing it for a stimulus check from the municipal government that they can waste on not the kid. The other 70% in the foster care system are there because their parents lack the financial ability to care for them. As the foster care worker from the movie says, quote, "Most of what we do would be unnecessary if someone would just help these people," unquote. Now, it is certainly true that many of our fellow citizens could use a hand, especially when they have kids. But my dad actually works in the foster care system, and I'm sorry, but this is an extremely reductionist view of people's financial hardships. The problem is actually rarely just that people don't have enough money. It's that people are irresponsible or just plain stupid with money. That's what needs to be addressed even more. That's why 1/3 of lottery winners go bankrupt within 5 years, and well over half of basketball and football players have financial hardships after they retire. So Sound of Hope implying that people just need to give low-income families more handouts as it follows a bunch of low-income families successfully taking in an inordinate number of kids is misguided. But other than those couple of complaints, Sound of Hope is a movie everyone should check out for a few reasons. 1, it's good. 2, it's a great, inspiring, true story that will convict you to make a difference. Perhaps it'll even inspire you to get in on the foster care system, which would be awesome. If not, because that is a huge ask, it'll make you more aware of the plight of too many of the kids in our midst, and maybe you'll do something about it. Maybe you'll volunteer. And 3, and this is something much less noble that I care about, seeing this movie and others like it, low-budget films without any huge star power made by no-name studios, is a slap in the face to the big-name studios subjecting us to pathetic, unimaginative garbage on a regular basis. It's getting so bad that people were ecstatic to get The Fall Guy and Bad Boys Ride or Die, movies that maybe cracked an average rating. So when movies like Sound of Freedom, American Fiction, The Shift, Godzilla -1, and Sound of Hope do well, hopefully we get a little closer to some structural changes in Hollywood. Dare to dream, friends. Dare to dream.
All right, the sauce.
What?
The sauce. I don't know. You're using too much sauce. Okay? Review's over.